For most of her life, Serena Williams was defined by strength. She pushed through pain, pressure, and history itself, becoming a symbol of invincibility in a sport that never expected her to last this long. But now, Serena is facing something she cannot overpower with talent or will alone. And beside her, Alexis Ohanian, the man who stood through every triumph, is quietly preparing for a farewell no one imagined. This is not a story about defeat on the court. This is about what happens when even the strongest legends are forced to confront their most fragile reality. When strength stops being enough. For decades, Serena Williams trained her body to endure what most athletes could not. Pain was not something to be feared. It was something to manage, suppress, and outlast. Injuries were treated as obstacles to be worked around rather than warnings to slow down. This mindset carried her through one of the most demanding careers in sports history. But it also taught her to ignore signals that should have never been ignored. Long before the public sensed anything was wrong, Serena was already fighting a private battle that offered no trophies, no applause, and no finish line. Years later, she admitted that migraines had plagued her for much of her adult life. At the time, she dismissed them as ordinary headaches, unaware that they were symptoms of a deeper neurological struggle quietly influencing her energy, focus, and emotional balance on a daily basis. As her tennis career began to slow, those symptoms became harder to outrun. Retirement did not deliver the calm many imagined it would. Instead, it removed the structure that had shaped her identity since childhood. Without the strict routines of training, competition, and recovery, Serena was left facing emotions she had long postponed. She openly acknowledged that stepping away from the sport made her feel unsteady, disoriented, and vulnerable. In rare moments of honesty on social media, she admitted that some days she simply was not okay, and that learning to accept that truth was more difficult than any match she had ever played. For someone conditioned to equate resilience with silence, that admission marked a profound internal shift. This emotional reckoning unfolded alongside renewed health concerns. Serena had already survived life-threatening pulmonary embolisms earlier in her career, experiences that permanently altered her relationship with her own body. Motherhood deepened that awareness. Pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum recovery exposed just how fragile even the strongest body could be. The conversations with doctors changed in tone. They were no longer centered on recovery timelines or returns to form. Instead, they focused on management, risk reduction, and long-term stability. The language of competition gave way to the language of caution. Throughout this period, Alexis Ohanian's role evolved quietly but noticeably. Once known for public declarations of admiration and grand gestures of support, he became more reserved, more protective, and more attentive to what Serena needed rather than what the world expected from her. Public appearances became fewer. Their relationship shifted from celebration to preservation. Whatever the diagnosis ultimately meant, it was clear that this was not something Serena could overpower through discipline or determination alone. For the first time in her life, strength was no longer enough. And in facing that reality, Serena Williams began a different kind of fight, one defined not by dominance, but by acceptance. A child taught never to break. Long before Serena Williams became a global icon, she was a child shaped by discipline, survival, and relentless expectation. Born on September 26th in Saginaw, Michigan, she was the youngest of 5 sisters in a household where security was fragile and opportunity had to be fought for. Struggle was not an abstract idea in the Williams home. It was a daily condition. When the family relocated to Compton, California, that reality intensified. The neighborhood was marked by violence, economic hardship, and instability, and childhood innocence did not last long. In that environment, tennis was never treated as a pastime or a source of fun. It was framed as a way out, a lifeline that carried the weight of the family's future. Richard Williams did not raise Serena to enjoy the game. He raised her to survive it. With no formal coaching credentials and little regard for conventional pathways, he constructed a detailed long-term plan for his daughters that governed nearly every aspect of their lives. Serena was homeschooled, shielded from outside influences, and taught early that emotional expression could be a weakness. Pain was something to endure, not acknowledge. Fear was something to bury, not examine. Winning was not framed as success, it was framed as responsibility. From the age of 4, Serena was conditioned to accept discomfort as normal. Public courts in Compton became her training ground, and hostility became part of her education. Crowds could be aggressive, insults were common, racism was not subtle. Yet none of this was treated as an interruption to her development. It was incorporated into it. Richard believed that if his daughters could withstand those conditions as children, nothing on the professional tour would break them later. His decision to delay Serena's full professional debut was strategic, but it also reinforced a deeply rooted philosophy: endure first, reflect later. That mindset followed Serena when she turned professional at 14. Facing older, stronger opponents, she did not protest the imbalance. She adapted. Losses were not discussed, they were absorbed. Emotional responses were internalized, not processed. By 16, she was already pushing deep into tournaments, and by 17, she had claimed her first Grand Slam title. The lesson was unmistakable. Resilience produced results. But that lesson came at a cost. Serena was never taught how to stop. Emotional fatigue was reframed as motivation. Physical warning signs were treated as challenges to overcome rather than signals to slow down. This upbringing produced one of the greatest champions in sports history, but it also created a dangerous habit of silence. As her career advanced, Serena became remarkably skilled at masking pain, minimizing symptoms, and projecting strength even when her body was asking for rest. Years later, that same conditioning would complicate her health. Migraines, exhaustion, and emotional strain were filtered through a lifetime of training that equated breaking down with failure. By the time Serena could no longer ignore what her body was telling her, she had already spent decades convincing herself that stopping meant weakness. And that belief would make the next chapter of her life the hardest challenge she had ever faced. The love story that changed its shape. When Serena Williams met Alexis Ohanian in Rome, nothing about the moment felt destined. She was already one of the most recognized athletes in the world. He was a tech entrepreneur who barely followed tennis. Their worlds did not overlap, and neither was looking for a life-altering connection. Yet that quiet breakfast at the Cavalieri Hotel became the beginning of a relationship that would later be tested far beyond public imagination. At first, their bond was light. Alexis followed Serena on tour, flying across continents just to watch her play, learning her world from the sidelines. Serena, accustomed to control and self-reliance, found comfort in someone who did not compete with her strength but admired it without condition. When Alexis proposed at the same hotel where they met, the gesture symbolized symmetry and certainty. Their wedding soon after reflected celebration, stability, and a future that seemed firmly under control. That sense of control did not last. Pregnancy introduced fear where confidence once lived. Serena won a Grand Slam while unknowingly pregnant, but the triumph was followed by one of the most dangerous periods of her life. After childbirth, she experienced severe breathing issues and correctly identified the signs of a pulmonary embolism, a condition that could have killed her if ignored. Medical staff initially dismissed her concerns. She insisted. The scans confirmed multiple blood clots in her lungs. Alexis witnessed a side of Serena the world never saw, not the champion fighting opponents, but a mother fighting to survive. Complications continued. Her surgical wound reopened. Emergency procedures followed. Weeks of immobility replaced training routines. The woman who once defined movement was forced into stillness. From that point on, Alexis's role changed. He was no longer just her partner in joy, but her advocate, her shield, her witness. The language between them shifted from future plans to medical terms, from ambition to caution. Over time, as migraines worsened and emotional strain deepened after retirement, Alexis stepped further into the background publicly, choosing privacy over presence. The love story did not end. It evolved. What once thrived on spontaneity and shared momentum now relied on patience, restraint, and acceptance. When health conversations replaced career milestones, Alexis did not leave. But he began preparing emotionally for realities neither of them had planned for. The body that paid the price. At her peak, Serena Williams looked indestructible. Her serve was feared, her movement explosive, and her mental edge unmatched. But behind the dominance was a body absorbing punishment year after year. From the mid-2000s onward, Serena played through recurring knee injuries that limited her movement and forced constant adjustments to her style. Back pain followed, then shoulder issues, each one demanding rehabilitation while the expectations never slowed. What made Serena different was not the absence of injury, but her refusal to surrender momentum. She returned again and again, often before her body was fully ready, driven by an internal pressure to remain visible, relevant, and dominant. Every comeback reinforced the myth that she could outwork biology. But biology was keeping score. The 2009 U.S. Open controversy became a turning point not just emotionally, but physically. The stress of public scrutiny, combined with mounting physical strain, pushed her nervous system to its limits. In the years that followed, Serena experienced extreme fatigue, inflammation, and pain that no amount of training could fully erase. Still, she continued winning, collecting Grand Slam titles into her 30s, defying every historical precedent in women's tennis. Then came the pulmonary embolism. A blood clot in her lungs forced an abrupt stop. Doctors warned her that returning to elite competition carried real risk. Training was no longer just about performance. It was about survival. Even after returning, the fear lingered. Every pain carried a question mark. Every headache carried memory. Her historic victory at the Australian Open while pregnant was celebrated as one of the greatest feats in sports history, but it also masked how fragile her physical state had become. Pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery compounded existing health vulnerabilities. Later, when doctors identified a branchial cyst in her neck, the reminder was unavoidable. Her body was no longer cooperating the way it once had. Retirement did not bring relief. Instead, symptoms once drowned out by competition grew louder. Migraines intensified, emotional exhaustion surfaced. Without tennis to distract her, Serena had to confront the long-term cost of a career built on endurance. This was no longer about winning, it was about limits, and the realization that some battles could not be approached the way she had approached every match before. When the silence became louder than the crowd. When Serena Williams officially stepped away from professional tennis, she described it not as an ending, but as an evolution. Publicly, the language was hopeful. Privately, the transition was far more complicated. For the first time since childhood, Serena no longer had a schedule built around survival and competition. The structure that had carried her through pain, controversy, and history was gone, and what replaced it was silence, a silence that forced her to sit with everything she had once outrun. It was during this period that Serena began speaking more openly about her mental health. In one of her most striking admissions, she wrote that she was not okay, and that it was okay to admit that. For a woman long portrayed as unbreakable, the statement landed with weight. It was not a performance. It was an acknowledgement of exhaustion, grief for the life she had lived, and uncertainty about the one ahead. Motherhood brought grounding, but also fear. Serena became increasingly aware of her physical limits, especially after years of medical trauma. Migraines, lingering pain, and anxiety no longer had competition to mask them. Every symptom felt heavier without the momentum of the tour. Health discussions were no longer about recovery timelines, but about management, prevention, and long-term quality of life. Alexis Ohanian stood beside her, but his presence changed. He spoke less about ambition and more about protection, less about building legacies and more about preserving stability. In interviews and public appearances, he shifted focus toward family, privacy, and emotional presence. The loud declarations of love were replaced by quiet consistency. This is where the idea of goodbye emerges, not as abandonment, but as acceptance. Alexis was not stepping away from Serena. He was stepping away from the version of life they once imagined. The chase, the certainty, the illusion that strength could solve everything. Serena, too, was saying goodbye. To competition as identity, to invincibility as armor, to the expectation that she must always endure in silence. The diagnosis, whatever its full scope, forced both of them to confront a reality that could not be negotiated or conquered. And for the first time, Serena Williams allowed the world to see her not as a champion pushing forward, but as a human, learning how to stop. Serena Williams spent her life fighting every battle head-on, but this one has no opponent across the net. Do you think stepping away was the hardest decision of her life? Or the bravest one? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.